Welcome to the conversation on TYT. I'm Michael Shure, and today joined by Albert Lee. Albert is running for Congress in the 3rd District of Oregon. Albert, thanks for being on TYT. I have to ask you a question. I've covered Congress for a while. I've gotten to interview Earl Blumenauer, who you are running against in a primary in Oregon, a number of times. He's not the typical member of Congress that you would see being primary. Tell me the motivation for you in trying to get his seat.
Well, number one, thank you for bringing that up. I don't think it's his seat. I think it's the people's seat. He just happens to occupy it at this point. So really, in a nutshell, he's been in office for 24 years, typically has a progressive voice and a progressive vote. But the reality is we need more than somebody that's just going to vote the right way. We need leadership. We need somebody that's going to actually push the envelope and get us to where we need to be. Case in point, Medicare, single-payer Medicare for all. You know, if you've got Congress people, and I don't care if you're on the left or the right, if you're taking corporate contributions, that is swaying you. Okay, so he takes corporate contributions from health industries. Up until last fall, he was taking money from the fossil fuel industry, and to this day, he has millions in fossil fuel stocks. So while being a proponent for single-payer healthcare, while being a proponent for the Green New Deal, I don't see a whole bunch of fight coming out of him. And right now, these crises are for real. We need to do something right here, right now. And equivocating and taking the money and telling us one thing, that's lip service progressivism.
Tell me about that, because it's interesting. You brought up the time we're in right now, and how can you not? What would Congressman Lee do differently today in the times of pandemic than he sees the congressman representing the 3rd doing right now, and maybe even the Congress as a whole doing right now?
Well, for one thing, they're taking a little break. I mean, we're in the middle of an emergency. I don't see what reason they should not be working right now to try to get a stimulus package to the people. And working in the first stimulus package, before they even got to the first stimulus package, they decided to dump trillions of dollars into Wall Street to save the assets of the 1%. And then it took that was without deliberation. And then it took days to deliberate on trying to get something to the people. And while they did that, they snuck in another $500 billion with no strings attached to corporations. And many of us are waiting for a $1,200 check, a one-time $1,200 check that's not even going to pay for the rent in April. So we've got millions of people that are unemployed right now. We've got food lines, okay? And then we've got farmers throwing away food because they can't make a buck on it. These are serious times. We need to have serious address to these issues. One of the things about the COVID crisis is it is highlighting all of the different issues that are a very big concern. Our for-profit private health insurance as employer base is just not cutting the deal. We need a single-payer Medicare for all system. All of us working from home has demonstrated that we can reduce the pollution that is hitting our country and around the world. We can actually do these things if we had the political will. Now, we're not going to have that so long as we have money in politics. We're not going to have that so long as we have corporate-backed politicians, career politicians who have been there for years. Okay, we need citizen representatives who know the struggle and who won't take that corporate contribution and who will truly represent and fight for the people.
Yeah, and Earl Blumenauer is one of those, you could say, I think, a career politician, someone who's been there for quite a while.
Seriously, I mean, I haven't seen much action out of him in the last decade. He's been there for 24 years. That's longer than Vladimir Putin's been in office. And quite frankly, a farm bill 2 decades ago, being good on bicycles and weed, that's pretty cool. But I mean, we've got a homelessness crisis that has been a crisis for a generation. We have the lack of affordable housing and living wages. And we have a climate concern where he says that he wrote the Green New Deal. But I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing any real true action. We need to get the money out of politics. And the only way to do that is to elect Congress people, members of Congress that aren't going to take the money.
You know, among Democrats, I want to ask you a little bit about Medicare for all. I want to ask you about the Green New Deal, most specifically Medicare for all. It had a national spotlight this year so far. It got a little bit of a rebuke in that the candidates who espoused it most were not the ones who ended up winning the nomination. What do you feel has to be changed, and what could a Congressman Lee do to change the narrative around Medicare for all? Because when you ask people about it, the people really like it. When you ask them to vote for it, they don't. And again, this election is about a lot. It's turned into a referendum on Donald Trump more than it has an issues-oriented one. But how would you change that narrative up?
Well, see, with the presidential election, we had over two score or a score of candidates out there, some that were espousing different versions of Medicare for All, muddying what that truly meant. And I think that confused people, number one. Number two, I think that what was happening was you had folks that were telling you one thing and then switching, and it was a bit of a bait and switch. Ultimately, in the end, I think it was a combination of mainstream media together in concert with the establishment of the Democratic Party that torpedoed Bernie Sanders and his run.
Right. I think about the issue more, though. I think about, how whatever the history of what happened this year, it didn't happen, Medicare for All, but there are a lot of people that want to see it happen. What would you say has to change about the way that's done? I mean, listen, even if the blame can go to the media, the establishment, Democrats, whoever, what would you do to change their effect on it then?
You got to vote them out. I mean, that's the bottom line. We've got hundreds of good progressive candidates around the country that have been inspired by Bernie Sanders, that have been inspired by the squad over the last two cycles. We need to get a few more in, okay? You get a voting block in, and then you got leverage, okay? You get a nice solid voting block at 10, 5 maybe, but 10 definitely. You can start swaying the opinion. We've got, freshman members of Congress who have dictated and shifted the perspective. Quite frankly, it was Bernie Sanders in 2015 and 2016 that moved the Overton window to making it not sound ridiculous in the first place, to making it sound something that is feasible. And it's just another step to get there.
Tell me about this. I like asking this of candidates. What was the moment, you could fill stadiums with people who think about running for Congress and don't. What was the moment where you said, you know what, I'm going to run for Congress this year. It's time and I got to do it. But do you remember the specific moment?
Yeah, I mean, the specific moment was a couple years back when I was putting a face mask on my daughter because of the wildfires here in Oregon. We live here in Oregon where we're supposed to have rainforest. And we've had wildfires the last 2 years, not last summer, but the 2 years before that, that were devastating. It looked post-apocalyptic. And it doesn't matter if you have 500-year floods every year, wildfires every year, an entire continent. It seems like nobody seems to really care. Nobody sees the writing on the wall. And I'm saying something's got to give. We need a planet for my daughter to live on. We need a stable country and government for her to live in and a life worth living. Those are 3 main points. Okay, you might think of those things as being super selfish, but I think at the same time, I think it's something that everybody wants.
Yeah, for sure, and that makes a lot of sense. And I always like to know what that is, and that's a great image. I mean, it's a horrendous image, but it's a vivid one. You're going to have to appeal to people who have been voting for Earl Blumenauer for a very long time. You might even be among them. I'm sure if you've been in, and I know you've lived in Oregon a couple of times, but I'm sure you voted for Earl Blumenauer, and it's a guess. What do you say to that voter who, isn't particularly upset with Earl Blumenauer, but, could be had? What's the convincing argument?
So there's a couple of different arguments. Number one, I mean, if you want to talk about, and they talk about seniority on a regular basis, the fact of the matter is we have a divided government at this point. There is no Democratic legislature in power right now. If you want to build up the power for this representative seat, it's time to switch horses at this point so that person can build up the momentum to get into the positions necessary that when the Democrats do take control of both houses, you are in a position to actually get some things done. I mean, Earl's long in the tooth. I mean, he's 71 years old. He's been in politics for almost 50 years. The reality is it's time for a sea change, number one. Number two, I think a fresh perspective from someone from a different background, from a different life experience is necessary, especially here in the most diverse district of our state. Right now, we have 7 representatives in the federal delegation. 100% of them are multimillionaires, part of the 1%. 100% of them are property owners. 100% of them are over the age of 62. 100% of them are white. And that's not representative of this state, where less than 1.4% of us are millionaires. 44% of us are renters. And a good chunk of us are below the age of 62. And a quarter of us are not white.
And that's a perfect argument. Can you tell me briefly an interaction with a Blumenauer voter you've had where they say, all right, you know what, you've sold me?
You know what, I was walking in Selwood this summer, and I actually ran into somebody that was a classmate of Earl's, an older woman. walking her dog, and I gave her a handout of my kickoff. And she said, well, you know, I went to school with Earl, and I really love Earl. And I gave her the basic arguments. I said exactly what I said to you, and she said, you know what? I think you're right. I think it is time for a change.
What an extraordinary experience. Albert Lee is... It's albertlee2020.com. You'll see it blazoned here, I'm sure. Albert, great luck to you. We hope to hear back from you and hear how it's going. Congressional races are fantastic, and it sounds like you've got an uphill but a fascinating fight ahead of you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.